The Prime Minister has announced a delay in the banning of sales of new petrol and diesel models from 2030 to 2035. But what does this actually mean? Well, it means that cars like this one, not quite this because it's a Ford Fiesta and they're no longer available, can still be sold in the UK as new until 2035. But it doesn't mean a delay in going zero emission only in the UK. That deadline is still set at 2035, like it always has been. Originally, between 2030 and 2035, hybrid vehicles and plug-in hybrids were also allowed to be sold in the UK. It was just petrol and diesel models being banned. Now, in 2035, everything apart from zero-emission vehicles, which includes battery electric and fuel cell hydrogen vehicles, will be stopped. It's also important to note that this does not affect the used car market, meaning we're still going to be seeing petrol and diesel vehicles and petrol and diesel fuel being sold in the UK for many, many years to come after the 2030 ban is put in place. Currently, electric vehicles cost more to buy than their petrol or diesel counterparts. And even if you take total cost of ownership into account, it can take some time for an electric vehicle to reach that price parity with a petrol or diesel model. So the delay means that drivers who are thinking about the switch but cannot afford to do so right now have an opportunity to actually consider driving a newer car and prepare or wait until those electric vehicles come down to the same price level as internal combustion engine models. The announcement also gives car makers, rather than government, the power to dictate the direction that the automotive industry moves in. There are several car makers who have already pledged to end sales of petrol and diesel models themselves by 2030. This could still happen, and those car makers are now under less pressure to ensure that it does. But by reducing the amount of petrol and diesel models in their mix, or banning them completely, they hold the legislative power to the consumer. The new date also gives more time for the UK's charging infrastructure to grow. It's easy today to get petrol or diesel, but getting electric charge into a battery electric vehicle is a bit more difficult. In order for the technology to move from early adoption to mass market, there needs to be a substantial increase in charging infrastructure. For those who do not have off-street parking, those who rely on street side parking or who live in flats like the ones behind me without a dedicated parking space, reliance on the public charging network is greater than it ever could be. They will need access to fast and rapid chargers, and currently the UK doesn't have enough of those to meet demand, especially in areas outside of London, where the vehicle to charging point ratio is considerably bigger. This means that by 2035, with less pressure, we should be in a position for more ultra chargers for the masses. Now, we also need to talk about China. In the EU at the moment, there is discussion around instigating an investigation into Chinese car makers and their imports into the continent in order to ensure that the domestic market can remain competitive. The UK is no longer part of the EU and therefore may not be bringing in its own investigation. But the Prime Minister did point out that imports of Chinese cars add to carbon footprint as they're being shipped from the country into the UK. What this delay also does is allow car makers to provide cheaper options in their own model mix. If drivers are forced to go down the electric vehicle route sooner rather than later, and with those cars still more expensive, they will look for cheaper options, and Chinese vehicles are cheaper. Now, some of them are very, very good quality, but ultimately an increased number are coming into the UK and Europe, and that distorts the market. The key points to therefore remember are the zero emission only rule has not changed, just the petrol and diesel ban has been delayed. And by 2035, the only thing that can be sold brand new will be a battery electric or fuel cell hydrogen vehicle. Charging infrastructure will have the opportunity to greatly improve. Car makers will be able to dictate their own terms and their own product mix rather than relying on legislation to do it for them. Imports of cheaper battery electric vehicles will still come into the UK, but domestic car makers in Europe have an opportunity to compete with them by bringing their prices down as technology develops. And overall, the consumer has the choice until 2035 over what type of car they buy, allowing for zero emission technology to get cheaper and cheaper as a result, and infrastructure to grow to a point where it is definitely usable by the masses. It does come with a trade-off, of course. Greenhouse gas emissions may go up as a result beyond their forecast between 2030 and 2035. And of course, it means car makers will still be developing petrol into a period where we really should be going zero emission. But whatever your take on the subject, the fact remains the UK will still be going zero emission vehicle only in the brand new market at least from 2035 onwards. Even if petrol and diesel vehicles are prolonged by another 5 years, it's down to the consumer to make the choice and the car maker to make the vehicles affordable for the masses.